Hello, welcome. It is I, Kali Mortwood. I took my braids out and now have this. I brushed my hair out. This is where we are. And honestly, I really love it. And I kind of wish I could keep it this way, but it won't stay this way. Anyway, yes. Welcome. This is week 6 of our Tuesday Tales of Terror, where we read stories. We're working our way through Edgar Allan Poe. It's not always going to be Edgar Allan Poe, and who even knows if I'll continue this forever. But this is just something, an author who I really love and appreciate and wanted to work my way through at some point. So there we are. And we are in part 2 of the Pit and the Pendulum. Now, where we left off, let me do a brief summary of our previous encounter with this story. We have a man, I'm assuming a man, excuse me, how dare I assume their gender? They haven't said what they are. We have a person who has committed some crime and has been put into this cell as part of their punishment. And at first the cell was completely dark, and they walked all the way around the edge of the cell, and then they found that in the middle there were these pits. They could feel that there were some kind of pits. And then they were poisoned and knocked unconscious by the food and water that was left in the cell for them. And when they woke up, they were strapped onto a table thing, completely strapped down, and the only thing that's free is their left hand, and their left hand can reach out and grab food, and there is no more water. And now they're able to look around and see the rest of what's going on, so they can tell that they're in the pit. And that's how far we got. They're in this cell in the pit, strapped to a table. Do you mind? And able to eat and drink from reaching, and that's where we are. Let us carry on. We got about 6 pages left, and it looks like that's how much we made it through last week. So hopefully we finish part 2. No matter where we get, we're probably gonna finish. Stop talking, Kali. Just go. Andiamo. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet overhead and constructed much as the side walls. In one of its panels, a very singular figure riveted my whole attention. It was the painted figure of Time, as he is commonly represented, save that, in lieu of a scythe, he held what, at a casual glance, I supposed to be the pictured image of a huge pendulum, such as we see on antique clocks. Really? Excuse me, I'm going to let Cleo out really quick. Yes, go, go, go. Shutting this. Apologies. Blah, 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 blah. Antique clocks. There was something, however, in the appearance of this machine which caused me to regard it more attentively, while I gazed directly upward at it, for its position was immediately over my own. I fancied that I saw it in motion. In an instant afterward, the fancy was confirmed. Its sweep was brief and, of course, slow. I watched it for some minutes, somewhat in fear, but more in wonder. Wearied at length with observing its dull movement, I turned my eyes upon other objects in the cell. A slight noise attracted my notice, and, looking to the floor, I saw several enormous rats traversing it. They had issued from the well which lay just within view to my right. Even then, while I gazed, they came in troops, hurriedly, with ravenous eyes, allured by the scent of the meat. From this it required much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time before I again cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased in extent by nearly a yard. As a natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was the idea that had perceptibly descended. I now observed, with what horror it is needless to say, that its neither extremity was formed of a crescent of glittering steel about a foot in length from horn to horn, the horns upward, and the under edge evidently as keen as that of a razor. Like a razor also, it seemed massy and heavy, tapering from the edge into a solid and broad structure above. It was appended to a weighty rod of brass, and the whole hissed as it swung through the air. I could no longer doubt the doom prepared for me by monkish ingenuity in torture. My cognizance of the pit had become known to the inquisitorial agents. The pit, whose horrors had been destined for so bold a recusant as myself. The pit, typical of hell and regarded by rumor as the ultima thule of all their punishments. The plunge into this pit I had avoided by the merest of accidents. I knew that surprise or entrapment into torment formed an important portion of all the grotesquerie of these dungeon deaths. Having failed to fall, it was no part of the demon plan to hurl me into the abyss, and thus, there being no alternative, a different and a milder destruction awaited me. Milder! I half smiled in my agony as I thought of such application of such a term. What boots it to tell of the long, long hours of horror more than mortal, during which I counted the rushing oscillations of the steel, inch by inch, line by line, with a descent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages. Down and still down it came. Days passed. It might have been that many days passed ere it swept so closely over me as to fan me with its acrid breath. The odor of the sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. I prayed. I wearied heaven with my prayer for its more speedy descent. I grew frantically mad and struggled to force myself upward against the sweep of the fearful scimitar. And then I suddenly fell calm and lay smiling at the glittering death as a child at some rare bauble. There was another interval of utter insensibility. It was brief, for upon again lapsing into life, there had been no perceptible descent in the pendulum. But it might have been long, for I knew there were demons who took note of my swoon, and who could have arrested the vibration at pleasure. Upon my recovery, even amid the agonies of that period, the human nature craved food. With painful effort, I outstretched my left arm as far as my bonds permitted, and took possession of the small remnant which had been spared me by the rats. As I put a portion of it within my lips, there rushed to my mind a half-formed thought of joy, of hope. Yet what business had I with hope? It was, as I say, a half-formed thought. A man has many such, which are never completed. I felt that it was of joy, of hope, but also felt that it had perished in its formation. In vain I struggled to perfect, to regain it. Long suffering had nearly annihilated all my ordinary powers of mind. I was an imbecile, an idiot. The vibration of the pendulum was at right angles to my length. I saw that the crescent was designed to cross the region of the heart. It would fray the serge of my robe. It would return and repeat its operations again and again, notwithstanding its terrifically wide sweep, some 30 feet or more, and the hissing vigor of its descent, sufficient to say, to sunder these very walls of iron. Still the fraying of my robe would be all that, for several minutes, it would accomplish. And at this thought I paused. I dared not go farther than this reflection. I dwelt upon it with a pertinacity of attention, as if in so dwelling I could arrest here the descent of steel. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of the crescent as it should pass across the garment, upon the peculiar thrilling sensation which the friction of cloth produces on the nerves. I pondered upon all this frivolity until my teeth were on edge. Down, steadily down it crept. I took a frenzied pleasure in contrasting its downward with its lateral velocity, to the right, to the left, far and wide, with the shriek of a damned spirit, to my heart with the stealthy pace of the tiger. I alternately laughed and howled as the one or the other grew predominant. Down, certainly relentlessly down, it vibrated within 3 inches of my bosom. I struggled violently, furiously, to free my left arm. This was free only from the elbow to the hand. I could reach the latter from the platter beside me to my mouth with great effort, and by no farther. Could I have broken the fastenings above the elbow, I would have seized and attempted to arrest the pendulum. I might as well have attempted to arrest an avalanche. Down, still unceasingly, still inevitably down, I gasped and struggled at each vibration. I shrunk convulsively at its every sweep. My eyes followed its outward or upward whirls with the eagerness of the most unmeaning despair. They closed themselves spasmodically at the descent, although death would have been a relief. Oh, how unspeakable! Still I quivered in every nerve to think how slight a sinking of the machinery would precipitate that keen, glistening axe upon my bosom. It was hope that prompted the nerve to quiver, the frame to shrink. It was hope, the hope that triumphs on the rack, that whispers to the death condemned even in the dungeons of the Inquisition. I saw that some 10 or 12 vibrations would bring the steel in actual contact with my robe, and with this observation there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen, collected calmness of despair. For the first time during many hours, or perhaps days, I thought. It now occurred to me that the bandage, or surcingle, which enveloped me was unique. I was tied by no separate cord. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent athwart any portion of the band would so detach it that it might be unwound from my person by means of my left hand. But how fearful in that case the proximity of the steel, the result of the slightest struggle, how deadly! Was it likely, moreover, that the minions of the torturer had not foreseen and provided for this possibility? Was it probable that the bandage crossed my bosom in the track of the pendulum? Dreading to find my fate, and, as it seemed, in last hope frustrated, I so far elevated my head as to obtain a distinct view of my breast. The surcingle, damn, are we going to keep using this word? Enveloped my limbs and body close in all directions, save in the path of the destroying crescent. Okay, so it's across their entire body except for where the pendulum is swinging. So someone did plan ahead a little bit for that. And we're going to look up surcingle right now, because if this is a word, we're not having another neater episode.
Surcingle.
That just means a strap, like a leather strap. Here we are. Scarcely had I dropped my head back into its original position when there flashed upon my mind what I cannot better describe than as the unformed half of that idea of deliverance to which I have previously alluded, and of which a moiety only floated indeterminately through my brain when I raised food to my burning lips. The whole thought was now present, feeble, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. I proceeded at once with the nervous energy of despair to attempt its execution. For many hours the immediate vicinity of the low framework upon which I lay had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as if they waited for motionlessness on my part to make me their prey. To what food, I thought, have they been accustomed in the well? They had devoured, in spite of all my efforts to prevent them, all but a small remnant of the contents of the dish. I had fallen into an habitual seesaw or wave of the hand about the platter, and at length the unconscious uniformity of the movement deprived it of effect. In their voracity, the vermin frequently fastened their sharp fangs in my fingers. That was fun. Can we say that one again? I really liked it. Are you ready? In their voracity, the vermin frequently fastened their sharp fangs in my fingers. With the particles of the oily and spicy find which now remained, I thoroughly rubbed the bandage wherever I could reach it. Then, raising my hand from the floor, I lay breathlessly still. At first the ravenous animals were startled and terrified at the change, at the cessation of movement. They shrank alarmedly back. Many sought the well, but this was only for a moment. I had not counted in vain upon their voracity. Observing that I remained without motion, one or two of the boldest leaped upon the framework and smelt at the surcingle. This seemed the signal for a general rush. Forth from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood, they overran it, and leaped in hundreds upon my person. The measured movement of the pendulum disturbed them not at all. Avoiding its strokes, they busied themselves with the anointed bandage. They pressed, they swarmed upon me in ever-accumulating heaps. They writhed upon my throat. Their cold lips sought my own. I was half stifled by their thronging pressure. Disgust, for which the world has no name, swelled my bosom, and chilled with a heavy clamminess my heart. Yet 1 minute, and I felt that the struggle would be over. Plainly I perceived the loosening of the bandage. I knew that in more than one place it must already be severed. With more than human resolution, I lay still. Nor had I erred in my calculations, nor had I endured in vain. I at length felt that I was free. The surcingle hung in ribbons from my body, but the stroke of the pendulum already pressed upon my bosom. It had divided the serge of the robe. It had cut through the linen beneath. Twice again it swung, and a sharp sense of pain shot through every nerve. But the moment of escape had arrived. At a wave of my hand, my deliverers hurried tumultuously away. With a steady movement, cautious, sidelong, shrinking, and slow, I slid from the embrace of the bandage and beyond the reach of the scimitar. For the moment, at least, I was free. Free, and in the grasp of the Inquisition. I had scarcely stepped from my wooden bed of horror upon the stone floor of the prison when the motion of the hellish machine ceased, and I beheld it drawn up by some invisible force through the ceiling. This was a lesson which I took desperately to heart. My every motion was undoubtedly watched. Free! I had but escaped death in one form of agony, to be delivered on to worse than death in some other. With that thought I rolled my eyes nervously around on the barriers of iron that hemmed me in. Something unusual, some change which at first I could not appreciate distinctly, it was obvious, had taken place in the apartment. For many minutes of a dreamy and trembling abstraction, I busied myself in vain, unconnected conjecture. During this period I became aware for the first time of the origin of the sulphurous light which illuminated the cell. It proceeded from a fissure, about half an inch in width, exceeding it entirely around the prison at the base of the walls, which thus appeared, and were completely separated from the floor. I endeavored, but of course in vain, to look through the aperture. As I arose from the attempt, he's been crawling on the floor trying to look through this crack that's in between the floor and the wall that goes all the way around. That's where this strange light is coming from. As I arose from the attempt, the mystery of the alteration in the chamber broke at once upon my understanding. I have observed that, although the outlines of the figures upon the walls were sufficiently distinct, yet the colors seemed blurred and indefinite. These colors had now assumed, and were momentarily assuming, a startling and most intense brilliancy that gave to the spectral and fiendish portraitures an aspect that might have thrilled even firmer nerves than my own. Demon eyes of a wild and ghastly vivacity glared upon me in 1,000 directions, where none had been visible before, and gleamed with the lurid luster of a fire that I could not force my imagination to regard as unreal. Unreal! Even while I breathed, there came to my nostrils the breath of the vapor of heated iron. A suffocating odor pervaded the prison. A deeper glow settled each moment in the eyes that glared at my agonies. A richer tint of crimson diffused itself over the pictured horrors of blood. I panted. I gasped for breath. There could be no doubt of the design of my tormentors. Oh, most unrelenting. Oh, most demoniac. Demoniac of men. Next, I shrank from the glowing metal to the center of the cell. Amid the thought of the fiery destruction that impended, the idea of the coolness of the well came over my soul like balm. I rushed to its deadly brink. I threw my straining vision below. The glare from the enkindled roof illumined its inmost recesses. Yet for a wild moment did my spirit refuse to comprehend the meaning of what I saw. At length it wrestled its way into my soul. It burned itself upon my shuddering reason. Oh, for a voice to speak! Oh, horror! Oh, any horror but this! With a shriek, I rushed from the margin and buried my face in my hands, weeping bitterly. I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit confused about what just happened. We're going to continue regardless. The heat rapidly increased, and once again I looked up, shuddering as with a fit of ague. There had been a second change in the cell, and now the change was obviously in the form. As before, it was in vain that I, at first, endeavored to appreciate or understand what was taking place. But not long was I left in doubt. The inquisitorial vengeance had been hurried by my twofold escape, and there was to be no more dallying with the King of Terrors. The room had been square. I saw that two of its iron angles were now acute, two, consequently, obtuse. The fearful difference quickly increased with the low rumbling or moaning sound. In an instant the apartment had shifted into its form into that of a lozenge. But the alteration stopped not here. I neither hoped nor desired it to stop. I could have clasped the red walls to my bosom as a garment of eternal peace. Death, I said. Any death but that of the pit. Fool! Might I not have known that into the pit it was the object of the burning iron to urge me? Could I resist its glow? Or if even that, could I withstand its pressure? And now flatter and flatter grew the lozenge. With a rapid width came just over the yawning rapidity that left me no time for contemplation. Its center, and of course its greatest width, came just over the yawning gulf. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me resistlessly onward. At length, for my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. I felt that I tottered upon the brink. I averted my eyes. There was a discordant hum of human voices. There was a loud blast, as of many trumpets. There was a harsh grating, as of 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own as I fell fainting into the abyss. It was that of General Lasalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies. Okay, how are we feeling about that story? Because I think that it was terrifying, but I was wondering the entire time how the person was telling the story in the past tense. How did they survive it? I'm not too satisfied with the ending. I'm also really curious, but I guess it doesn't matter. What did they do to deserve this kind of punishment? What did this person do? Okay, so basically they were tortured in a very slowly moving pendulum that was going to slice them. Very slowly moving. And then they managed to get out of the surgical, which was strapping them to the table by having the rats eat through the bandages because they put their blood and stuff on the bandages. And then the walls got so hot that the walls were burning, and the square room was going more and more narrow like this, and kind of pressing them, and they had the well in the middle, and they didn't want to go into the well because they were scared of drowning in the darkness. Oh yeah, because it goes on, they're not sure how long. It was terrifying, but not my favorite. And that's okay. That's okay. We're not going to love all of them. We do have time for some prose. So let's see where we are. I feel like we should just continue forward. Let's make sure that we've read all the ones prior to... Yeah, it looks like we are doing great. So we have about 4 minutes, and this is a poem with 4 stanzas. So that works out very well. We might even... No, we won't. We're just going to read this one. So we're going to check it off with our little pencil. And then we're going to read it. Here we go. How often we forget all time when lone, admiring nature's universal throne, her woods, her wilds, her mountains, the intense replies of hers to our intelligence. In youth have I known one with whom the earth in secret communing held, as he with it, in daylight and in beauty from his birth, whose fervid flickering torch of life was lit from the sun and stars, whence he had drawn forth a passionate light, such for his spirit was fit, and yet that spirit knew not in the hour of its own fervor, which had o'er its power. Perhaps it may be that my mind is wrought to a fervor by the moon beam that hangs over, but I will half believe that wild light fraught with more of sovereignty from ancient lore hath ever told, or is it of a thought, the unembodied essence and no more, that with a quickening spell doth o'er us pass, as dew of the night time o'er the summer grass. Oh my paper. Doth o'er us pass, when as the expanding eye to the loved object, so the tear to the lid will start, which lately slept in apathy, and yet it need not be that object hid from us in life, but common, which doth lie each hour before us, but then only bid with a strange sound as of a harp string broken, to awake us. 'Tis a symbol and a token of what in other worlds shall be, and given in beauty by our God to those alone who otherwise would fall from life and heaven, drawn by their heart's passion and that tone, that high tone of the spirit which hath striven, though not with faith, with godliness, whose throne with desperate energy hath beaten down, wearing its own deep feeling as a crown. I did not like that, and perhaps it's because I'm just not in the mood for poetry this evening, or perhaps it just wasn't poetry that I would consider myself in the mood for at any point. Sorry, Mr. Poe. Don't hate me. Alright, well, that is the end of that. That concludes our evening Tuesday Tales of Terror. And let's see. Next week, I want to read. Leggo un libro con Signor Upfrog. So I would like to read the story with our friend Hot Frog, which is literally right here. And it's called, I found it. Remember how last week I couldn't find it because it wasn't time for us to read it? Okay, well, I found it. So that's next week. Perfect. Come back here next week, Tuesday, 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, for another Tuesday Tales of Terror. This concludes our evening, and I bid you Ciao. Stay spooky.